What if I told you the Great Depression wasn't just about a stock market crash? What if the real story is far more complex, involving gold, bad weather, and even board games? For 10 years, the world was plunged into an economic nightmare, but the reasons why are often misunderstood. Today, we are uncovering 5 shocking facts about the Great Depression that they didn't teach you in history class. Get ready, because this will change everything you thought you knew. Let's start with the big one, the 1929 stock market crash. Everyone knows about Black Tuesday, but here's the kicker. The crash itself didn't cause the Great Depression. It was more like the first big crack in a dam that was already about to burst. Think of it as a symptom, not the disease. Before the crash, the 1920s were roaring, right? Well, sort of. While some were getting rich, a lot of that wealth was built on shaky foundations. People were buying stocks on margin, which is like buying a house with a tiny down payment and a massive loan. When the market started to tremble, brokers called in those loans, forcing people to sell everything. This mass panic selling is what sent the market into a free fall. But the economy was already sick. The real culprits were deeper and far more destructive. And the crash was just the moment everyone started to notice. So if it wasn't just the stock market, what else was going on? Let's talk about fact number 2. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, made a terrible situation catastrophically worse. In the years leading up to the Depression, the Fed was worried about speculation in the stock market. So, they decided to raise interest rates to cool things down. This made it more expensive for businesses to borrow money, which slowed down the economy. Then, after the crash, when the economy desperately needed a boost, what did the Fed do? They did nothing. In fact, they allowed the money supply to shrink by a third. Banks were failing left and right, and people were pulling their money out in a panic. The Fed could have stepped in, provided liquidity, and saved many of these banks, but they didn't. They were stuck on something called the gold standard, which tied the value of the dollar to a fixed amount of gold. They were more afraid of people trading their dollars for gold than they were of the entire economy collapsing. It was like watching a house fire and refusing to use the water hose because you are worried about the water bill. This inaction turned a recession into a full-blown depression. Now for our third fact, which shows how a problem in one country can spread like a virus across the globe. It's called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. This one piece of legislation was an economic disaster. The idea seemed simple enough to its supporters. If we put a huge tax on imported goods, Americans will buy more American-made products, and that will help our factories. The problem is, other countries don't just sit back and take that. They retaliated. Canada, France, Britain, and others all slapped their own tariffs on American goods. Suddenly, American farmers and manufacturers who relied on selling their products overseas had their markets vanish overnight. International trade ground to a halt. Instead of protecting American jobs, the Smoot-Hawley tariff destroyed them and deepened the depression worldwide. It was a trade war that nobody won, and it taught a painful lesson about global interconnectedness that we still talk about today. Let's move on to fact number 4, and this one hits home, literally. The Depression wasn't just a financial crisis, it was an environmental one. The Dust Bowl. This wasn't just a random drought. For decades, farmers on the Great Plains in states like Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas had been overplowing the land. They tore up the native grasses that held the soil in place to plant millions of acres of wheat. When a severe drought hit in the 1930s, there was nothing left to hold the topsoil down. The wind picked it up and created monstrous, terrifying dust storms called black blizzards. These storms could travel for thousands of miles, blanketing cities like Chicago and New York in a layer of dust. For the people living there, it was apocalyptic. The dust buried farms, killed livestock, and caused a deadly illness called dust pneumonia. It forced hundreds of thousands of families, known as Okies, to abandon their homes and migrate west to California, searching for work that often wasn't there. The Dust Bowl was a man-made ecological catastrophe layered on top of an economic one, creating a perfect storm of misery, especially in the southern plains. But what about the North? While the South was battling dust, the industrial North was facing its own demons. And this brings us to our fifth and final fact: overproduction created a paradox of poverty amidst plenty. During the 1920s, new technologies like the assembly line allowed factories in cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh to churn out cars, radios, and appliances at an incredible rate. The problem was, wages for the workers making these products weren't keeping up. The rich were getting much richer, but the average worker couldn't afford to buy all the stuff being produced. The market was saturated. There were warehouses full of goods that nobody could buy. When the Depression hit, factories had to slash production and lay off millions of workers because there was simply no demand. This created a vicious cycle. Unemployed workers couldn't buy goods, which led to more factory closures and more unemployment. It was a bizarre situation where you had overflowing factories and starving people, a clear sign that the economic system was fundamentally broken. So, as you can see, the Great Depression was a complex storm of events. It wasn't just one thing. It was a stock market crash, disastrous monetary policy from the Fed, a global trade war, an environmental catastrophe in the South, and a crisis of overproduction in the North, all hitting at the same time. It is a powerful reminder of how fragile our economic systems can be and how decisions made in Washington or on Wall Street can have devastating consequences for ordinary people from the plains of Oklahoma to the factory floors of Michigan. The lessons learned during the decade shaped government policy for generations, leading to programs like Social Security and the FDIC, which ensures our bank deposits. It fundamentally changed America's relationship with its government. Thank you so much for watching. If you found these facts as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments which fact surprised you the most. See you in the next video.